Okay, well, Samita, how about you? Do you have any questions for us?
Yes, Jordan, because I'm so interested about this, Scott, because I'm so interested about this intersection between systems thinking
Yeah,
and mythology and
yeah,
societies, and also because it's very close to how I can see the parallels with the way I'm also thinking of the role that these stories play in the world.
yes.
So I wanted to get a sense of how that shapes your view of literature. And I
Oh
know
my
that's such a
goodness.
vast question, but
No, it's
yeah.
fantastic. I mean, if you look at all living systems as energy transformers, right, that necessarily intake, transform, and dissipate energy, part of what they have to do to stay a system is a boundary has to come from their work. So the chemical reactions going on inside a single organism, single cell organ, give rise to the cell membrane. But that cell membrane isn't a it's a permeable border. It allows some of context in and it keeps some of context out. And the reason I focus on those things is because it naturally and necessarily embeds all life in the energy transformation dynamics of the cosmos. I don't mean to sound like Carl Sagan, but it seems like sometimes we tell ourselves stories about what we are that disconnect us from what we're in. And what I try to teach my two students is that they are in, of, from, and about everything. And life is a matter of managing how much of everything you're about. And that means developing wisdom that lets you select more sophisticated boundaries because we can't be what we are without boundaries. So most people, the character phenomena like the Ramayana, they are cultural tools that help sustain certain types of boundaries. They teach them to their kids. They get before their kids are of the age where they can actually cognitively counter the argument. The countering usually comes from very precocious children or, adults later. But they're barely pretty helpless when it comes to embodying these narratives. And so I I want students to understand that they are living a whole life of implicit narratives. And my body has a narrative about gravity. And if my body doesn't use that narrative about gravity, I can't walk, right? So I'm not saying implicit narratives are bad, they're a necessary condition of being. But the challenge is to bring things, the opportunity we have is to bring some of our narratives to consciousness. And it's in that space of conscious possibility where then we can organize our work to perhaps transform. I'm not so much concerned about transforming people's minds that are my age, but transforming the context within which younger people develop, because they're going to embody these narratives implicitly just because their parents and their families do it, and that's what they celebrate. And they don't know that they're embodying it, right? So being aware of the stories you've embodied and then asking yourself, do you respect them? Do you respect yourself for respecting them? From a systems perspective, I tend not to spend a lot of time on extreme things such as right and wrong, because I think those are extreme fixed points that are not adaptable and they're not aligned with the dynamics of reality. I rather like ask people, and then poor Maisha, she's heard this so many times, but do you respect the boundaries that you keep? And what I think people will find is they live a life that helps more people expand and understand their own boundaries. They actually respect their own boundaries even more. So it may reduce to Buddhism, and I'm perfectly fine with that. But the issue is to get Western thinking out of this mental, physical binary that people can sit on and then generate all kinds of wonderful stories about divinity, absolute truth, these things that have been used to marginalize people for quite a long time. So narratives are what I'll call cognitive pheromones, right? They're the things we put into the world that constrain how other minds develop. And we're going to embody them. That's just what we are. So, try to develop some kung fu so you can make a choice about kind of narratives you embody. So thank you for the question. I don't often get asked that during ReggieCon, but it was a delight to be able to answer it. And it has been the absolute scholarly human thrill to collaborate with a literature scholar, and bring these kind of things to bear. And, I'm teaching a senior seminar in college using graphic novels. And Sita's Ramayana allows my students to practice seeing the world in terms of boundaries, the dynamic tensions across a page. Those are boundaries, right? And then what kind of boundaries are your neural networks developing to put them in a configuration related to that? And then what kind of boundaries are you creating with the world so you can actually sit and read the book and not get hit by a car, right? So just trying to get people to know that we are multi-scale systems of boundaries. That's not a sin. That's what we are. And then how do we develop boundaries that we respect? I think that's what it's all about.
It's so interesting that you say that, Scott, because one of the things I did in the last couple of years was I retrained as a psychotherapist and then as an organizational psychologist. And in an organizational psychologist, we're constantly thinking about what is the unconscious of a system? What is the unconscious in this group? What is the consciousness in this room? Why are we replicating certain behaviors that don't lead us towards success or towards the goals that have been communally chosen? And when you were speaking, one of the struggles for me has been, on one level, I am this writer and I have this divided identity, and my day job is being an organizational psychologist and working with CEOs.
Right.
Yet there is a similarity between these things because the narrative shapes that culture. I think what I was also getting from that is that, and the moment that we reframe the narrative, the system can align to a new perspective or can incorporate a new perspective. And that is how we evolve, because there is this other tension. There are definite problems in some of these stories that we have inherited, and yet they are part of our human heritage. I don't want to throw them out. I don't want to say, let's create a new story. Yes, let's create new stories, but let's also keep these. And how do we keep them in ways that are still alive, but allow us to expand? Because I think that's also how we maintain a kind of cultural identity. And I feel it limits to have a cultural identity, but I'm also so grateful to have one, even if I am the challenger and the rebel within that. So I think it was interesting to think about what you were saying in terms of culture, because cultural identity too is a system. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I really try to make sure people understand that identity is a boundary, right? It's there. It's who or what's going to be allowed in and who or what's going to be kept out. And that if you can't generate those boundaries, then you can't tell what's you and what's not you. And then we end up diagnosing you as schizophrenic. So cultures that don't have a tradition do risk anarchy, right? I mean, like tradition or not, it gives us an implicit sense of what we're supposed to be doing. Now, the beauty of us, the human system, is that we can challenge it. One of the challenges I see in my culture right now is the binary extremes are dominating both sides of the narrative so that it reduces into good and evil. And the complexity of the discussion simply vanishes, right? And all that old stuff is just so dumb. Well, no, it's not, because that way of thinking had a place in history, right? It sustained itself. We may not like that it sustained itself, but it did. And, as we go to transform the system that we're in, the question is, are we generating options that are sustainable? And what that means and becoming examine it. So, yes, everything we do plays out at the intersection of choice and chance every moment of our lives. And that's a story. So getting students to experience themselves, getting cultures to experience themselves as stories instead of binary extremes is what some of us thought democracy might be about. I'll stop there. I don't want to, Lord have mercy. It's a hard time to be interested in these things. And it's a hard time for a lot of people in the world, given what's taking place these days. So I'll stop there.